am your host, Dennis Horvitz, the David Letterman of the Hopelessly Damned. We are continuing with the discussion that we started last week, and let me take this opportunity to reintroduce our guest, Howard Rothman.
Thank you
for dropping in. He is a member of New York City Atheists and is a professor of biology at CUNY, which is the
City University of New York.
University of New York, and his field is basically human physiology. And we were discussing last week who wrote the Bible, and we had gotten to the point where you had mentioned that that there were one of the things that scholars began to notice about the Bible when they began to examine it critically.
Yes,
is
in the early 19th century.
In the early 19th century is the use of couplets and other
passages
right.
that seem to be addressing the same issue, but saying somewhat different content about them. The issues.
Right, and actually there are some cases. For instance, I think the Ten Commandments actually appears 3 times. There are 3 versions of the Ten Commandments. But there are several instances of couplets.
Yes,
which,
and we were addressing the question of couplets and how couplets came to be.
Yeah.
And one of the conjectures is that the Old Testament, as we know it today, was really an amalgam or a fusion of 2 separate versions of the Old Testament by 2 peoples who considered themselves to be equally Jewish, so to speak.
Yes.
And the conjecture is that one of the peoples was the people that we know as the Jews from the Old Testament, the people that were the southern half of the Jewish kingdom that existed under David and Solomon when it broke apart after the death of Solomon. There was a southern kingdom, a Jewish kingdom there that called itself the Kingdom of Judah, and then there was a northern kingdom which called itself the Kingdom of Israel. And it turns out that the southern kingdom of Judah had the temple that remained there for many centuries longer, and most of the activities of Jewish life in those days centered around the temple.
And that was in Jerusalem.
That was in Jerusalem.
Jerusalem was actually part of Judah.
That's right, exactly. And Israel, the Kingdom of Israel, which would be the northern half of the modern Jewish state of Israel, at that time really only had altars and what were called high places, but that means altars, where sacrifices were done, and tents of meeting that were not very different from the tents of meeting that Moses had in the desert, because the Old Testament specified exactly how you set up a tent of meeting. And
the Sukkot, probably.
Pardon?
Similar to the Sukkot.
No, there would be much more elaborate.
More elaborate than that?
Oh, yes, yeah. Probably as close to a temple under a tent as you could possibly make.
Wow.
And those particular places were holy places where sacrifices were made, and to maintain a semblance of the religion of Moses, there actually was a particular clan of the Kohanim, that is the priests of the Jewish religion, that went to the northern kingdom of Israel and administered to the people there. Now, presumably,
would these be the Zadokites?
Pardon?
Were they different from the Zadokites?
Oh yeah, they're quite different.
Okay,
Absolutely.
all right. I want to make sure that I wasn't getting confused.
Honestly, my apologies for not recalling the particular clan of that went. But the most important thing is there was a northern kingdom that practiced the religion of Moses and a southern kingdom that practiced the religion of Moses. And presumably over the centuries, there grew to be differences in the exact wording of what they thought the Old Testament ought to be, or at least the Torah portion of the Old Testament. And around 720 B.C., the Assyrians made war on the northern kingdom and defeated it and took away most of the inhabitants. The inhabitants dwelt, in modern terms, they've come to be known as the lost tribes of Israel. However, there is some conjecture the Talmud, which is another major Jewish religious document published in the centuries following Jesus. The Talmud suggests at some point that when the Persian conquerors of the Middle East, well, let me just backtrack a second. Just as the 10 northern tribes of Israel were carried away by the Assyrians, the later people that conquered the Assyrians, the Babylonians, came down and made war with the Jewish kingdom in the south and carried them away. And the both peoples, there was a point in time where both peoples were captive and away from this land, but certainly there is no question historically that the people from the southern kingdom are permitted to return when the Persians conquered the Babylonians, and they joyfully sent them back to occupy Judah. But there is some conjecture in Jewish history, if you read the Talmud, an important Jewish document from the early centuries of the Christian era. It says in places that many of the Israelites from the north that had been taken away and that had lived in captivity for centuries also were able to return both to the north and south in subsequent years. And the conjecture is, at some point, the people from the northern kingdom of Israel who had retained their version of the holy books, and the people from the southern kingdom who had retained their version of the holy books, really wanted to lay down their arms for the controversy, fuse whatever their separate beliefs had been, and they wanted to show appropriate respect for the differing views. And so they put passages addressing the same issues in different ways into the same books.
Yeah, it was mushed together. A lot of it was mushed together. Right.
And in our latter day, when we have translated these books, what we have are books that are pretty uniform in dealing with whatever the subject matter of the particular book is, but there are specific passages where the two different versions are just within a few lines of each other.
Right. I understand too. I mean, I've read some commentary that one of the reasons why the versions were kind of mushed together is because the rabbis or the scholars at the time didn't really want to be burdened with trying to figure out which was actually the word of God. They didn't want to even.
They probably would have had a lot of controversy too,
Yeah.
and particularly along the lines of the separate nationhoods of the sub-nations within the nation,
Right.
The Jewish nation. Those that come from the northern Israelite tradition, and those who had come from the southern Judah tradition.
Right.
And it was a good way to avoid controversy. But the most important point that I'm trying to make in regards to who wrote the Bible, particularly as regards those who say, "Oh, God wrote the Bible."
Right. Right.
And the answer is, if you try to look at the content of the Bible in great detail, you find that there are some places that you can make an unerring judgment. People wrote the Bible, and people had their own reasons for editing in or editing out,
Yes.
whatever they put there. And we can find evidence of that if we read the Bible carefully.
Right. Well, and I think that a lot of people, if not most people, are really not even familiar with the tenets of their own faith anyway, at least in the Judeo-Christian culture. And in fact, in all fairness, a lot of the debunking or the rebutting of common misconceptions about the Bible have actually been done by religious scholars.
Yes.
We haven't yet gotten into the New Testament, but you spoke during the break. We were discussing about Constantine, and in fact, there's a great book called Constantine's Sword by an ex-Paulist priest by the name of Jim Carroll, and he basically says, for instance, that very important moment in Christianity where Constantine is supposed to have seen either the cross in the sky or heard the word of God, where it's an in hoc signo vinces and the sign you shall conquer, than the fact that most Christian scholars understand that as just a myth. And it isn't,
Yes.
it's not even secular. I mean, I'm sure secular scholars agree, but it was
Okay,
Christian
well,
scholars.
apparently you want to address Constantine and his role in the content of the Bible, and that's fine.
I use that just as an example. I mean,
Well, that's
I don't
good.
wanna,
Let's explore that a
Yeah,
little bit.
okay.
One of the things, let's talk about the Emperor Constantine.
Okay.
He lived from the late 3rd century until well into the 4th century. And the period in which he lived was one in which the Roman Empire was crumbling. It was hard to establish lines of succession of the emperors. And he himself made an arrangement with 3 other would-be emperors to divide the empire into 4 parts, and each would rule a quarter of it. But he had no intention of keeping his part of the bargain. He wanted, like a mafia gangster, get rid of the other guys and have the whole empire to himself. While he
Nothing new under the sun.
While he ran his little section of the empire, which was in Western Europe, including the territory of France, he encountered, he noticed that many of the local people did not practice the Roman religion or even the old Gaullist religion, but they had adopted this new religion called Christianity. And since he had parts of his sub-empire, if you will, that were Christian and parts that were non-Christian, he could compare the relative amounts of disorder in both areas, and he found that there was vastly less social disorder in the Christian areas. And when he inquired as to why, he found that the Christians were concerned that if they went off and killed somebody to steal what he had, that they wouldn't go to heaven, they'd go to hell. And he found that this was a remarkable way, by promoting this belief, he had the feeling it would be a remarkable way to pacify the empire.
And the Christians of all the groups, I think the Christians at the time of his ascendancy were in fact the most organized of all of these different groups initially. You
Well,
know.
I don't know if they were the most organized. Certainly the Roman religion was organized. It had been around for many centuries and under the auspices of Rome. And various other sections had their own religion. Gauls still had Druidism.
But I emphasize, I just use that to make the point that it was a politically astute move on Constantine's part to you know.
It might have
align
been.
with
I mean, the Christian movement did have its pope in Rome, but the pope's position at that point in time was nowhere near as well established as the pope is
that's
today.
right.
And at that time, what Constantine did when he finally actually managed to conquer the other 3 would-be emperors, he said that if he managed to do so, the legend is if he managed to do so, that he would make Christianity the official religion of the empire. And he made that vow in 313, and he was really quite successful in defeating the last of his challengers, who actually seemed to have a bigger and better army than he did, but he still managed to snatch a victory from the jaws of defeat, and attributed his victory to God helping him, and that he should he should do something, return the favor to God by making the empire Christian.
Right, that was Maximus, I think, wasn't it? Wasn't that the emperor that he defeated, the opponent, the general?
Honestly, I forget. I just remember that the story takes place at the Milvian Bridge outside of Rome.
Right, I think that's what it is. Yeah.
And now, no sooner did Constantine decide that he wanted to make the empire Christian, but that he realized that there really were a variety of Christian sects, and in his era, and that he couldn't just wave a wand, carte blanche, and say we're all going to be Christian. And the second thing that he also found, was that there was a great deal of resistance from various elements of the population to just being converted in their religion. People were, they considered their religion to be honestly more sacred than their emperor. So they would
That would be a problem. That would be politically, yeah.
It indeed was. And so what he had to do was to sift through the various different Christian sects, and at the same time try to find an ideology that they had among the different sects, or an ideological variant that would be most acceptable to the peoples of the Roman Empire. And for example, there was an Arian sect, Arian,
Right.
followers of a particular philosopher named Arius, who had lived in the 2nd century. And basically, Arius claimed that Jesus was not divine. He was not really the Son of God.
Right, right.
And he was a brilliant philosopher, a well-meaning, well-spoken individual.
He was not the only one either. There were other groups. That,
There
but
were.
he's, yeah.
And there was another sect called the Gnostics, and the Gnostics had a rather complex philosophy, but that really was not totally monotheistic. And between the various sects, I should say, trying to decide on which of the various sects would be best for the conversion of the empire, it proved to be a very difficult task. And finally, what Constantine decided to do, after mulling for more than a decade, he finally decided to call a council from 323 AD to 325. And even this council in the city of Nicaea in Asia Minor just pondered which of the different Christian doctrines to pick as the standard one for the Roman Empire. And they finally decided to pick the one that insisted that Jesus was divine. And the reason why they wanted that is this particular sect, which is the one that now is the Church of Rome, believed that Jesus was the son of a god that fertilized a mortal human female in order to produce an offspring. And this was actually quite similar to the formal religion of Rome, which believed that the god Jupiter had raped the young female named Europa and given her 2 sons, Romulus and Remus. Romulus, who turned out to be the father of Rome. And it would really be a lot easier for the people of Rome to believe that they just have to try a new variation of an old, new wine in old bottles, so to speak, to accept this religion that says, well, we've got a different deity, but he really did the same thing. He really had sex with an earthly female and produced a deity of an offspring, and we really should think in those terms. And this is what
or try to not even try to just kind of blur the line without even kind of make them think that they basically believed in the same God. The basic. And that happens a lot, though, I've noticed in
attempts at religious conversion.
Yeah, and that proved to be a very good tactic for the church, because later on it worked well for them.
It made it much more palatable, plus the fact that the Pope at the time, Eusebius, was quite agreeable to most of the changes that Constantine wanted to make, one exception being adoption of the crucifix as the sign of the Christian faith.
Sorry to interrupt. Eusebius, now, was he the Pope, or I understood that he was the Archbishop of Caesarea, or was that like an equal?
It more or less was the status of that. The status of the Pope in Rome was really not established.
It hadn't solidified
until about 150 years later.
Right.
When Attila the Hun was sweeping through Europe, and the Pope of Rome pacified Attila the Hun. That, at the time, it would have been equivalent to the Pope persuading Adolf Hitler to go back out of France and pull back out of Russia and just go back to Germany and be content to live in Germany.
Right.
And since the Pope accomplished that feat at that point in time, it established him, it made the Christian world think that he must truly be sit at the right hand of God.
It gave him street cred. Street credits.
An enormous amount.
Yeah.
And so at the time, Eusebius was the most prominent Christian
He was certainly a pope equivalent, probably.
He
in those
was. He
days,
was the
yeah.
most prominent Christian for Constantine to deal with at the time.
Right.
And Eusebius, while he was extremely pleased that Constantine was going to make Christianity the official religion of the Roman Empire, whereas before Christians were basically considered to be nutritious food for lions.
And atheists. They were considered atheists.
Yes, they were, because they were not believers in the standard belief.
Right.
And as a consequence of that, Eusebius even agreed to go along with the adoption of the crucifix as a symbol of Christianity, because the crucifix had actually been the symbol of Rome, the religious symbol of Rome, except that it had a spear tip at the top. And all that the Romans were going to be asked to do would be to kneel and genuflect before a crucifix that was slightly different from the one that they had always done all their lives.
Right.
And so it made the adoption of the new religion a lot more palatable, and that was the most important thing as far as Constantine was concerned, because he wanted a Roman Empire where people believed that they would go to hell if they acted uncivilly, if they engaged in any kind of civil disorder, because that was the very thing that would undermine the empire.
That's one way of keeping your ducks in a row. Psychological pressure.
Yes, and that's what the religion did. Now, one other point with respect, well, actually two other points. Along the lines of getting the people of the empire to accept the new religion, Christianity, Constantine had one very serious concern, and that was knowing fully well that the power that he held in his empire was dependent upon the willingness of his army to go out and to fight for him. And he was well aware of the fact that for several centuries his army had adopted a Middle Eastern religion called Mithraism.
Yes.
And the reason was where they worshipped a deity named Mithras, who went at the winter solstice. Mithras died and was reborn, and then grew and grew and grew until the summer solstice, and then started to shrink and shrivel away to the winter solstice again.
Just
and
think how we came this close to wishing people Merry Mithras.
Yes.
I'm sorry, I had to get that in there.
Yes,
Compulsive one-liner, I can't help it.
Yes, okay, thank you. Because I was getting too serious. Okay, in any case...
Who was another god. But
Well, the reason why the Roman legions worshipped Mithras was that the worst defeat in history, some centuries before, had befallen them at the hands of the Parthians in the Middle East, and they were worshippers of the god Mithras.
those damn Parthians, boy, they were trouble.
And so the net result was that the Roman legions had the feeling that if they only worshipped the right god, they would find victory would be more likely to be theirs. And so for several centuries they had worshipped Mithras, who always died at the winter solstice and was reborn. And that was on December 21st, when the Julian calendar for the Roman Empire was first put forth by Julius Caesar around about 60 BC. However, what happened at that time was that the Julian calendar was imperfect, and it lost about a day every century. And so by the time of Constantine, 4 centuries later, it had lost 4 days, and the winter solstice no longer occurred on December 21st. It occurred on December 25th. And what Constantine did was he said, look, you guys, I know you're a powerful army and you take your duties very seriously and you take this celebration very seriously. I'm going to ask you to make a little compromise and to be consistent with the rest of the empire, and that is, on this day, December 25th, continue to have this wonderful celebration that you have had for centuries. Celebrate the birth of your deity, the way you've always done it, except instead of celebrating the rebirth of the god Mithras, celebrate the birth of the baby Jesus, and then you can be as Christian as the rest of the people in the empire. And since the most important thing was that the soldiers didn't want to give up was their celebration, they figured they could accept a new deity as long as the celebration remained. And so we come to celebrate Jesus on Christmas Day.
Right.
But there is a second point that I wanted to make, and that is that while the conversion of the Roman Empire to Christianity went along rather smoothly, it turns out that the intelligentsia of the Christian Empire, who really, of the Roman Empire, who had become Christianized, they spoke Latin, and when they would like to look for guidance from holy books as to practicing the newfound Christian faith, they found the holy books were either written in Greek or Hebrew, neither of which they understood. And the pressure became so great that a later emperor commissioned the person who became Saint Jerome to translate the holy books into Latin. And so we come to the question of who wrote those books and what did he put into them when he made a Latin version.
Unfortunately, we have come to the end of another show. Our guest has been Howard Rothman, we have been discussing who wrote the Bible and some historical perspective behind it. I have been your host, Dennis Horvitz. Thanks for watching and see you next week.
Okay.